We're going to start off in verse 5. Let me give you the setting. It's so many days after, or weeks even, after Christ, his departure. Christ was crucified, third day he rose. After the day that he rose, he was seen for 40 days with the apostles, teaching them and exhorting them and giving them the orders on what it was they were supposed to do concerning the kingdom of heaven. Now, on the 50th day after, it was called the Feast of the First Fruits, or is referred to as the Feast of Weeks when you read the Old Testament. In this passage, it was referred to as the Pentecost because Pente was Latin for 50. So it was 50 days after the Passover. Now, like I said, that all goes back to the Passover in when it was established in the book of the Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers. You had certain high holy days, you had the Passover, and then you had 7 weeks after the Passover, and on the day after the 7th week, in other words, the 49th day, on the 50th day after Passover, that was when they had a high holy day called the First Fruits. In other words, we offered up the first 10% of our harvest and our animals. So that this event that we're getting ready to read is taking place on that holy day. Okay? Read on down, brother. Verse 5, right?
Yes.
Acts chapter 2, verse 5.
And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men.
Now, listen to this, because it established, when it says they were dwelling out of Israel, out in Jerusalem, Jews, devout men, it tells you they were devout, because it's going to name where all these men came from, but they still made it a point to come back to observe the feast, to observe the Passover, and the subsequent, or the high holy days that followed the Passover. And that they were referred to as being devout. In other words, they hadn't stuck or integrated or assimilated into the cultures and customs and traditions of the nations in which they were living. They made it a point every year to come back to Jerusalem and honor their high holy days. That's what we refer to as devout. Read that again.
And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men.
Jews, devout men. Now listen to where they are. Go ahead.
Out of every nation under heaven.
Out of every nation under heaven. So right off the bat, it already began. The difference between these people who were considered devout and they were Israelites living in other lands, is because, like I said, they did not assimilate into the nature or the culture of the nations in which they existed or they were living. They retained their own culture. Now, they had other Israelites who also lived in these very same countries that we're going to read the list to, and we're going to go to the map to show you where these people were. They had other groups of Israelites that lived in the very same lands in exile, so to speak, but they did assimilate. In other words, they wouldn't come back to observe the Israelite culture. They wouldn't keep the laws. Those are the Gentiles that the Bible is talking about. In other words, Christ didn't come to get the ones who were already there. He said, oh no, he came to get those that were lost. So read on down.
Verse 6. Now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language.
In other words, out of all you know what you have to do? You have to read it from verse 1. Because they don't understand what's taking place. What took place was on this particular day, the Pentecost, the 12 apostles were gathered. And all of these Israelites, Jews, that were born in other countries, came to observe the feast, but they still couldn't speak the language. And when the apostles began to give them the account of Jesus Christ, or Yahushua, what had just taken place in Jerusalem before they got back, they were speaking to them in all of these various languages. So that's what's referred to. So go ahead and pick it up from verse 1.
Acts chapter 2, verse 1. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues.
In other words, split tongues, go ahead.
Like as of fire.
In other words, above each one of the apostles, there was cloven tongues, in other words, like tongues of fire that was in the form of fire that was split. Go ahead.
And it sat upon each of them, and they were all filled with the Holy Ghost,
Right.
and began to speak with other tongues.
Now, when he says other tongues, he's letting you know they wasn't doing that stuff that we've been taught in America and all the other countries where we had. Blah, 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 blah. He's telling you. He's going to tell you. People understood these apostles. There were people. They had their own people that were in town who were born and raised in other countries that didn't speak Hebrew. So the miracle was that the apostles, who were known, all of them, to be from Galilee, were speaking in languages that people all over the known world at the time could understand. Read on down.
As the Spirit gave them utterance. And there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men, out of every nation under heaven. Now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together, and were confounded.
In other words, all the people that were there, when this is confounded, they literally were confused. How could this be? Continue.
Because that every man heard them speak in his own language.
Now that shows you the term tongues is talking about languages. In other words, there were people that heard these apostles speaking, and they had been in Israel, just for the observers, but they were born in Egypt. So they were speaking Egyptian, and they heard the people who were from Galilee speaking in their language. Go ahead.
Verse 7. And they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans?
See, all these people that are speaking, aren't they referring to the apostles? Aren't they from Galilee? Galilee was a city that was in the region of, actually that was in north. It was in the northern part of the kingdom of Israel. It was situated far more north than Samaria. We'll go through on the map once we get to it. Go ahead.
Verse 8. And how hear we every man in our own tongue?
Listen, if they're from Galilee, how come we can hear every man in our own language? Go ahead.
Wherein we were born.
Wherein we were born. Remember, these are Israelites. How is it these Israelites were born in these other lands? Because of the succession of captivities that we had gone through by the time Christ hit the earth. Go ahead.
Parthians.
Now hold on, let's get to that. When it says Parthians, that's talking about the Far East. Parthia today would be considered farther east. It would be like farther east than Afghanistan. We got the map good? This is Parthia right here. So when it says Parthians, you got the Euphrates River, you got the Tigris River. If we were to go farther south, following the rivers, you'd hit the Persian Gulf. So Parthians today would be considered either people of Iraq or Iran. But that's how far east the Israelites were scattered. Now remember, it's giving you an account of all the Israelites that were living in other countries, that had been born abroad, that spoke other languages. They were listening to the apostles who never left Galilee, speaking in their own language. In other words, speaking in Parthian. Parthians, go ahead.
And Medes.
When it says Medes, I'm going to go to another map. We can keep the same thing positioned here. The Medes are in a similar region, but a little, let's get that. We're going to get where the Medes, if they have where the Medes. Yes, the Medes. There you go. Once again, using as a reference, the Euphrates River and the Tigris River, the Persian Gulf. This, in the other map, was considered Parthia. If you notice, they got Parthia even farther east. So it said Parthians. It came back and it said Medes. This area here, today, that's it. That's like a border between, it's oscillating between Iraq and Iran. You got the Caspian Sea. So today, this region here is known as Azerbaijan. You got up here is known as Iran. That's why it's put Media, Persia. The Persians today are the Iranians and everyone, well, for the most part, East Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India. Continue, Brother Green.
Elamites.
Elamites. It said Elamites. In other words, Elam. Same region. Iran, Iraq. Go ahead.
And the dwellers of Mesopotamia.
And the dwellers of Mesopotamia. Now, when you say the term